Good morning. In times of need, Rotary responds around the world or right within our own countries. This was the case during the 2013 Alberta floods. Pat Killoran is a member of the Rotary Club of Lethbridge and the immediate past governor of Rotary International District 5360, which includes 2,100 members and 49 clubs. He's the N Polio Chairman Coordinator for Zone 24 West and an honorary chief of the Blood Tribe, one of the largest First Nations in Canada. Please, with me, give Pat a super District 6400 welcome.
Good morning. Chuck, thank you for that kind introduction. They tell me Chuck can get long, so he did a good job of being short. My friends, can you imagine 12 to 18 inches of rain in your community in 48 hours? Can you imagine the emotional strain of a young couple with children and a large mortgage who were told their flooded home was condemned and their insurance didn't cover overland flooding? Can you imagine the high degree of stress for a senior citizen on a meager pension when his accommodations are flooded, all his possessions lost, nowhere to reside, and sadly, at the age of 79, needing to go back to work? Can you imagine the overwhelming uncertainty for a young business owner whose business premises were flooded, whose condo was destroyed, and insurance declined for both? This, my friends, was the experience of many, many people in our floods of 2013. RI President's Representative Lee, District Governor Liz, leaders past, present, and future, Rotarians, participants from the youth programs, and friends. In response to the terrible floods of 2013, as total strangers, with only Rotary as our common bond, Super District 6400 stepped into service to help us. I appreciate being able to share the flood from a Rotary perspective and to thank you for your participation in the Global Grant for Small Business in High River. As we begin, let me refresh your memory. As is common in our area, early summer rains combined with snowmelt from the mountains, causing rivers to rise. In 2013, people knew a problem was coming. However, their only reference point was the memorable flood, the most memorable flood in recent times, the so-called 100-year flood in 2005 that inflicted $400 million in losses. From that experience, people knew where the water breached the riverbanks. They knew the areas that had been flooded in the past. They knew where the new dikes had been built. They knew where the high ground would be. They were prepared, or so they thought. On June 19th, heavy rains began, and over the next 3 days, unspeakable events occurred across southern Alberta. There were 32 communities in southern Alberta and 26 neighborhoods in Calgary that declared a state of emergency. The map only highlights some of the hardest hit in the 250-mile floodplain from Canmore on the west to Medicine Hat in the east. The physical losses were over $5 billion, the largest insurance event in Canadian history. Water volumes were up to 10 times normal and more than double those of the 100-year flood 10 years earlier. 100,000 people were evacuated, many for as long as 2 weeks. Some, to this day, have never returned to homes that were condemned. It was a sad time. We were fortunate to have lost only 5 lives. But as I came to understand over the next several months, the emotional and mental toll on survivors was huge. It still is huge today. We are also fortunate to live in a prosperous province in a country like Canada, where much-needed support came from every direction, including yours. As we look at the next series of slides, I want you to think about the power of Mother Nature. She has twisted this railway track like chicken wire. When we put ourselves in Mother Nature's way, there are usually consequences. Whether we build communities in floodplains or below sea level or on tectonic fault lines, eventually there will be consequences. At the west end of the district, Cougar Creek terrorized the town of Canmore. Homes jeopardized by the river, people being displaced. In Calgary, 2 rivers converged on the downtown area, leading to evacuation as the rivers rose. Major infrastructure was damaged. The Calgary Stampede was underwater just 2 weeks before opening day. Miraculously, they opened on time, reflecting the resilience of the city. This train bridge failed due to the water erosion of the support system, and roads were destroyed. Although many communities sustained serious damage, the community of High River took the most devastating hit, with all 14,000 people evacuated, 600 by helicopter. 60% of the town covered with water, and 75% of the homes suffering flood damage. Not to mention the damage to utilities, schools, businesses, and the town infrastructure. The downtown business area was badly damaged, with many of the buildings still empty today, and many of the entrepreneurs no longer in the area, some relocated, some gone forever. High River residential areas were hard hit, with 3,800 homes, 75% of them, sustaining flood damage. The water rose extremely quickly, not allowing time to move vehicles to high ground and trapping people at home and at work. People knew the river was flooding, but no one expected 60% of the town to be flooded, putting people at risk, 14,000 evacuated. In Canada, most of our homes and buildings have basements, which are seriously susceptible in a flood. Here is a challenge that faced many, many homeowners in the flood area. This basement is full of dirty water, sewage, and perhaps rotting food, all of which would bring a risk of disease if not emptied quickly. When the water receded, you can imagine what remained. Mud and silt, several inches deep, saturating everything. 100% loss in most cases. Every flooded basement needed emptying, and this is what yards and neighborhoods look like. 40,000 tons of people's valuables. Not garbage, people's valuables. Over 2,000 truckloads hauled away in 16 days. Appliances lined the streets, waiting for pickup. $5 billion in damage in the region. That's the physical damage. But as I said at the outset, the emotional trauma was far-reaching. Everyone has a story, a sad story, sometimes buoyed by someone else's act of kindness, but nonetheless sad. Let me tell you the story of Sheena Small, because her experience is typical of so many. Sheena is a delightful young Rotarian. She suffers from Williams syndrome, a rare neurodevelopmental condition, but with very hard work and the strong support of her parents, over the last 9 years, she has developed a business in High River. Sheena's Sweets and Such, her business, was in the downtown area that we saw a few slides ago. The store absorbed 6 feet of water on the main level, destroying everything. Sheena also lived in her condo, where a 13-foot wall of water enveloped the neighborhood. There was 4 feet of water in her main level. Her condo was condemned and will be torn down because it's built in the floodplain, built in Mother Nature's path. Because all this damage was caused by overland water, not sewer backup, it was not eligible for insurance. These are Sheena's furnishings, and in this brown box that she built in high school, she stored all her memories from that part of her life. All destroyed, gone forever. After the trauma of the flood, she left the community, and she couldn't return for several weeks. She was showing the emotional hurt and the reaction shared by so many. I tell you Sheena's story because it's typical of thousands of people in these communities. It's typical of the financial and emotional scars of people who experience loss of home, loss of possessions, loss of school, loss of business, loss of jobs, loss of memories, loss of community, and a loss of financial well-being. The anecdote, at least in some small way, was family and friends who cared, neighbors who volunteered, clubs and agencies like you that stepped into service, food banks and food programs that were precious, a government that answered the call. So many people, like Sheena, are better off because of the care and concern shown by people, in many cases, strangers. People cared in many ways. However, the immediate need at the time of the flood was to evacuate when the water came in like a tsunami. One local Good Samaritan farmer brought all of his equipment to town in a hurry, and he was one of the many who provided emergency transport. I doubt that riding in a used manure spreader had been on anyone's bucket list that day. Combines were particularly useful because the motor is elevated far above the water. 1,000 people volunteered to provide transportation, food, clothing, shelter, and health services. There was an urgent need to clean out basements, over 3,000, before mold set in. You saw the pictures earlier. So many volunteers stepped up, including Rotary work parties from all around the district. I worked with this crew, and we only completed one basement of the 3,000 on that day. There were so many that helped. 164,000 volunteer hours in the community, helping in so many ways. I hardly look properly dressed here to assume my district governor duties the very next day. And then maybe again I was. Here, the Red Cross hands out supplies, and I must say the breadth and the depth of the volunteerism and caregiving was remarkable. It was heartwarming, but it was also imperative to see people's lives stabilized, at least for the time being. I am proud to say that Rotarians and Rotary clubs, in addition to their physical labor, directed almost $2 million in different ways to the flood response. Rebuilding lives, and rebuilding communities. The district campaign received support from 140 clubs and districts across the continent, while the local clubs mounted their own efforts. They stepped into service. In Canmore, where Cougar Creek took a swath out of the town, the Rotary Club already owned a great reputation. And this was an opportunity to take advantage of that public visibility. The club made an early decision to use their profile to be an aggressive fundraiser. As a result, their foundation became the broker for funds that others raised. This was no ordinary fundraising, as the members of this club gathered in $840,000 over the next several months. To do so, they generated public awareness through ads and articles in the local paper as they worked the market. Their success was in part because they gave others a way to contribute. When people's hearts were touched, they were there with their hand out. Canmore Club received funds raised by local businesses and organizations who wanted to help, from organizations such as the New York Rangers NHL hockey team, who contributed $260,000, to the lemonade stand run by children wanting to be part of the solution, to restaurants and businesses that could raise the money but were not in a position to dispense it. All of these directed money to the Canmore Rotary Club. And how would they distribute the money in the community? Should they invest in redevelopment or support the immediate cash needs of the victims? This is a common debate in Rotary, development or aid. They decided to support the immediate cash needs of the victims. They worked closely with municipal agencies that did the screening of the applicants on Rotary's behalf. And through this process, they put a much-needed $800,000 in the hands of desperate recipients to pay rent, to buy food, to pay school fees, and so on. In High River, the story was different. 90% of the members of the club were personally impacted, and their priority was dealing with their own losses. It was 3 months before the club even began to meet regularly and consider how they might help their own community. Even then, they were seemingly in shock as a club. Slowly, however, their resolve returned. Due to the extent of the damages, there were many organizations and governments at work in this community. It became readily apparent that while many were willing to assist, no one was coordinating the overall efforts. So the club became part of an informal association formed to coordinate everyone's efforts. It was important to identify needs, share information, and avoid duplication. Through this process, the club uncovered many needs, and in the end, they set their priorities as follows. Firstly, they saw a gap in the emergency services available to the business community. They wanted to prevent the loss of entrepreneurs and the loss of the services that these businesses brought to their community. And this was a high priority for the club. Secondly, they identified organizations that were important to community life and had lost their equipment and supplies, sports organizations, social clubs, that type of organization. If community life was going to be rebuilt, these organizations needed help. And thirdly, The emotional strain of on people, on couples, on families, on businesses, required community building activities and support services. While other organizations were also involved in this area, there was lots of work to be done. Addressing the needs of the business community is the project that our districts share. The reason I thanked you at the outset. Together, our district sponsored a Rotary Foundation global grant to address needs in the business community. Commonly, global grants are spent in developing countries, but this was the first global grant where the proceeds were to be spent in our country. To achieve this, we required an international partner with at least 30% capital in the project. Thank you again to this district for helping make this happen. Our global grant, together, was to provide small business loans, training, and counseling to affected businesses in High River. We worked with an NGO that was already involved in these services. The grant was sizable at $300,000 Canadian, and that included the $100,000 match from the Rotary Foundation. This young man, John Barton, is a small contractor who received one of these loans to replace the tools of his trade that were all lost during the flood. By early summer, the fund will be 100% loaned up. Over 200 business people have received the benefits of the counseling and the training sessions. 22 jobs have been sustained. Solid results. But I am even more excited about the unexpected benefits. The provincial government learned what we were doing and asked Community Futures, the NGO, to deliver the program in 3 neighboring communities. The province agreed to fund the new communities as well as providing the operating costs for our project in High River. As well, the Canadian Red Cross built on the original model by providing funds for continuity workshops, as they call them, for small businesses. Altogether, the collaboration with others has doubled the resources available to the business community in High River to $600,000. And further still, the Red Cross and the Chamber of Commerce are considering partnering with the NGO, which is a national organization, for future disaster situations in our country. Seeds planted by our partnership. Give yourself a hand. High River's second priority was to rebuild community by supporting organizations that had lost their equipment and supplies. By establishing criteria and an application process, the club provided $75,000 to the organizations listed on the slide. As well, the demand for counseling and support. Those type of services remained at a need of 3 times pre-flood levels. And the club is currently looking at $150,000 for the food bank, a home for battered women, and an organization that supports people with disabilities. Rebuilding lives and rebuilding communities. With the extent of the trauma, the Rotary Club knew that many residents had little opportunity or money to socialize. What better time to raise spirits than at Christmas, when the club hosted a Gift of Hope free dinner and concert for 800 emotionally and financially needy people. There were hundreds of Rotary volunteers from outside High River, and entertainment was provided by nationally renowned artists. People attended who had not been to a social gathering for 6 months. This was an investment in hope. An opportunity to put troubles aside for just a few hours. Healing took place on that wonderful day. The Central Park in High River was previously a gathering place and was now in disarray. The next year, a $250,000 project that brought together 10 local Rotary clubs began to refurbish and upgrade the park to draw people out of their malaise and into community activities. One of the new and very popular features of the park was the Christmas lighting, which was featured at a pre-Christmas celebration with the community. Seems like a little thing, but buoying people's spirits is necessary on the long journey back to normalcy. As my time winds down, let me summarize my 10 takeaways from this experience. First, never, never ignore the power of Mother Nature. Stay out of her path. People are more important than things. Programs to rebuild spirit and morale are as needed as replacing property, even if you can't put a Rotary logo on them. After the story is gone from the front page of the newspaper, the hurt and the need remains in the community for a long time. Be sensitive to the fact that everyone has a different amount of financial and emotional capital. Some problems and some people fix quickly. Some may never be fixed. The town will be changed forever. It's estimated that 20% of the people have left town and more would like to go, but depressed property values make that difficult. And disasters are hard on relationships, on couples, and on families. Understand your insurance policy. Know what your coverage really means. We've learned that all water is not the same. Be aware that in disasters such as this, there can be a gap in coordinating the response of many people and organizations wanting to help. Leaders spring up everywhere, but someone needs to organize the leaders. Canmore demonstrated that having a good public image was invaluable in their fundraising. They would not have raised $800,000 without it. And you never know how far a good idea will go, given the chance. And lastly, Rotary's contribution, manpower and resources, local, national, and international, have been marvelous. The reputation of Rotary has been enhanced. Let me read you this message from a beneficiary. There are no words to describe the feeling of knowing that you matter to complete strangers and that they are giving you a helping hand when you need it most. When all is said and done, and we are back on our feet, we would like to be part of a program like yours so we could pay it forward. So perhaps the best way to finish is with a message from Patrick Webb, the president of the Rotary Club of High River, in which he acknowledges that your service above self is real and genuine. Fellow Rotarians in Super District 6400, I appreciate the opportunity to join you today to thank you for stepping into service in my district, for lighting up Rotary.